In this media, you will learn about closing control schematic of circuit breaker. Figure shows the control scheme of a circuit breaker. J1 positive and J2 negative shown in the scheme are the supply lines from the battery. These supply lines are branched for different DC control circuits. A manual switch is provided at the battery output end to have control over the supply output. There shall not be any main fuse at the battery output point. This is because if the main fuse blows, the whole DC system will fail, disabling complete control and protection functions. However, individual fuses are provided for different branches of DC control circuit. The control scheme for breaker closing operation is usually divided into two sections. One section is for local control at the breaker, and the other one is for remote operation from the control room. The dark point in the line indicates the position of the control switch 43, that is remote or local, with reference to the selected position or mode of the selector switch. By selecting mode using the switch, supply can be given to K21 line for remote or to the K23 line for local operation. Let us first look at the remote closing of the breaker. After keeping the selector switch in remote position, the following conditions must be satisfied to close the breaker. The TNC Trip Neutral Close switch has many contacts for different purposes. One of the contacts of TNC switch is taken for closing operation. That contact has to be closed by turning the handle of the switch in the required direction. In the scheme between the TNC switch and synchronization check relay, the line is indicated by K13/M/C-1/K18/M/C-2. This means that the circuit scheme is similar to both the machines 1 and 2, but the wire numbers are different. In many places, this type of indication is given in the scheme. Synchronization check relay must get picked up to close the contact 25x1. This relay picks up only when the incoming and running systems reach near synchronization matching. Master trip relay must be in dropped out condition to keep 86M contact closed. Master trip relay is one type of lockout relay. Once it picks up, it can't reset itself automatically. This relay has to be reset manually. For example, this can be cross-checked by going to sheet number 3 and check contact number 115 and 125 of 86M relay. The closing spring of the breaker must be in charged condition to facilitate the breaker closing. When the spring is fully charged, the limit switch Z22 closes. The auxiliary contact 52B of the breaker must be in dropped out condition. If all the above conditions are satisfied, then the breaker closing coil 52C is energized, closing the breaker. Once the breaker closes, its auxiliary contact 52B opens. When the breaker trips, auxiliary contact 52B will close. Now, let us move on to the local mode of the closing breaker. After keeping the switch 43 in local position, TNC switch should be brought to close position. Similar to remote mode, the limit switch and 52B should be in closed condition to energize the closing coil. As we discussed earlier, positive line J1 is now available to energize the closing coil as in remote mode to close the breaker. In both remote and local mode, anti-pumping relay coil connected in parallel with closing coil is energized simultaneously along with closing coil and open its contact 95-1. The purpose of this anti-pumping relay is to allow only one closing pulse to the closing coil. You know that the closing time of breaker ranges from 0.06 seconds to 0.1 seconds. Assume if there is no anti-pumping relay. In local mode, there is a possibility of the person in service to hold on the TNC switch in closed position for a long time, a few extra seconds, even after 52C got energized and the breaker closed. If breaker gets tripped immediately due to some fault and the person is still continuing to hold the TNC switch in closed position just for a few extra seconds, there can be another wrong and unwanted breaker closing. Assuming that there is no anti-pumping relay in the scheme, the contact 95-1 of this relay will not be there in the closing circuit, and thus the path for the current flow to energize the closing coil, 52C, is continuously available. Thus, the breaker will again trip and close repeatedly, leading to severe damages in the system. This unwanted multiple closing and opening of the breaker is known as chattering or pumping of breaker. Hence, it has to be prevented. Anti-pumping auxiliary relay 95 helps prevent this. Once the breaker is closed, relay 95 gets energized and opens its NC contact in the closing circuit and prevents chattering. After the breaker is closed, the green indicator in the unit control board glows. If the breaker opens, red indicator will glow in that panel. Thus, you have learned about the closing control schematic of the breaker.